Hi there, my name is Shelby Fogel and this is my video presentation on the deployment processes of Amazon, Instagram, and Stack Overflow. So let's get started. The first one we'll go over is Amazon. Amazon uses something called Amazon Web Services to deploy their application. There's several different processes involved in this, but there's two main ones that are involved in actually updating your code and pushing it to a live environment. And those are Amazon Code Deploy and Code Pipeline. The first picture you see is an example of Code Deploy. It goes over the idea of you have several revisions and then you have to deploy those revisions based on certain configurations. And then they go out to specific deployment groups where there's testing involved, and once all the testing is done, it's live. So code deploy is basically used for deploying your actual updates. What code pipeline does is it's more of a general service that basically offers continuous deliveries of new updates. So you have code deploy, which is a specific update being pushed into code pipeline, and that is what handles all the different processes of actually getting it to go live. So let's go a little further into how code deploy actually works. Code deploy can be broken down into 7 basic steps. The first step is to create the application. So if you're making a new application, you actually create it. Otherwise, you just update whatever version of the application is. The second step is to specify the deployment group. That means whenever you're pushing your code out to test it, you're specifying what groups you want to send it to. So if you have a group for a certain project and a group for another part of the project, you're only going to push it to that specific group. The third step is to specify the deployment configuration. This is basically just a fancy way to say how many instances you want to simultaneously deploy your application to. And this is also the step where you describe the success and failure conditions for the deployment. The next step is to upload the revision. This is basically where you just upload all of your files to whatever you specified for it to go to. This is also where you run any scripts that you need to run for when you update your application. The fifth step is to actually deploy your revision. This is basically you just pushing it out to whatever groups you specified earlier, and this is where the testing actually happens. Next, you check the results of the tests. The final step is to redeploy. So this is basically where you fix any bugs that you found after you pushed it to your test environment. Once all the bugs are fixed, you continue down the AWS code pipeline. So as you can see, we've basically gone over the steps for the developers. Once they make something new, they push their source to a test environment basically. And once everything's fully tested, then the next step is to deploy the code to their production servers, which is basically their live environment for their customers to access. And then from there they can do more debugging if there's problems reported by customers, and then they can fix that and basically push those fixes and any changes they have made since then, and that's the cycle of it basically. The next deployment process I want to go over is the one for Instagram. Instagram uses a continuous deployment process, meaning when they push something, it's automatically processed and tested and then pushed to a live environment. The core principle behind continuous deployment is automation. It's all about automatically doing the steps that normally humans have to take. So let's go over the process of how they do this. So the first step is the code is sent to an automated canary. A canary is basically just a testing group. It's a bunch of computers that they push changes to test and see if everything's working properly with whatever new features they've added. Once they push it to the canary, automated tests make sure that there are no conflicts conflicts between the old code and the new code, and they basically determine if it can be pushed, and if it can't, then it's sent back and it has to be fixed, and then they push it again to the canary until all of the bugs are worked out. Once everything's tested and ready for a full deploy on their test environment, they use a service called Jenkins, which is a continuous integration server that runs a bunch of automated tests that they've built on the new commit. It reports all the information back to something called Sauron. Sauron is a service that basically keeps track of all of their latest commits, which have passed, and when they do a rollout, it suggests the latest commit instead of one of the older ones, basically. So it's a service for keeping track of all of their developers' commits. And from there, if it finds no problem and everything's working, then it actually releases it to the live environment, and then people can see the updated application. So let's go over our final company, Stack Overflow. Unlike Amazon and Instagram, which are largely automated, Stack Overflow uses a different approach. The first step is to obviously make some changes to their application. Next, they test it against a local database, which is dependent on what part of their application they're working on. They have a bunch of different databases for each part of their application, and what this does is it checks that database for any differences and any errors that they might cause, and if that passes, then they move on to the migration step. So what does running the migration actually do? The migration basically looks at a local copy of their site database, and it contains a list of all the sites that the developers run locally, and the migrator uses that list to connect and run all migrations against all databases. And then basically what that's doing is just looking for any conflicts across their whole system. Once the migration completes and there are no errors, the final step is to commit the code and push it to a live environment. Now let's break down the steps that are taken within the migration to give further clarity of how this works. Basically, to make the changes live, it's broken down into 9 steps. You have the first 2 steps are different migrations. The next step is to find their Moonspeak toolset, which is something they use to push code live and basically work with their application. The 4th step is a translation dump for JavaScript. Basically what they have to do is convert all their code into a different language, or different parts of their code into a different language, so that all of their different aspects of their application can play nice together, because they're not all developed in the same language. The next step is to push the changes to MS Build to basically build their application, bring it all together. Step 6 is to translate all of the C# into a language that the application can understand. The next step is to import the English strings. What this is doing basically is pushing all of the new English into a translation database, and what that allows them to do is to automatically translate all of their new changes instantly. The next step is to deploy the changes to all of their websites. This is done simply by stopping their website, overwriting the files, and starting the website up again. The final step isn't really necessary, but it speeds up translation times. What it does is create a webhook that triggers an upload to their translation service, which basically forces it to do it quicker so that everything is translated and rolled out as fast as possible. And that's all there is to it for Stack Overflow. The idea behind theirs is to make everything as simple and as quick as possible. Then I have all my sources listed. Thank you for watching.